So, 2008, the entire global financial system just melts down. It felt like a train flew completely off the tracks. But how? Why? We're going to dig into that, using the analysis of someone who was right there in the middle of it all, Jacques de Larosière, to really figure out what went so terribly wrong.
And this is the big question he asked while it was all happening. You know, getting an answer to this isn't just some history lesson. It's about getting to the bottom of the real flaws in the system so we can actually fix them. So yeah, let's ask it again. Why did things go so spectacularly off the rails?
Okay, so our story really kicks off back in August 2007. And it starts as just a little tremor, right? A little problem in the US mortgage market. But that little tremor, it turned into a full-blown global earthquake that shook the entire financial world right down to its foundations. So to really crack this case, we've got to look at three key areas. I want you to think of them like this: the motive, the weapon, and the getaway car of the whole financial crisis.
All right, first up, the motive. See, for a crisis this big to even be possible, you need the perfect setup. And for about 10 years leading up to 2008, the world's economy was just swimming, absolutely drowning in easy cash. Just look at this chart. It's wild. For almost a decade, the amount of credit, money being loaned out, grew way, way faster than the real economy. It's like you keep pumping air into a tire, but the tire itself isn't getting any bigger. You can just feel the pressure building up, right? That's exactly what was happening across the whole system.
And the result of all that pressure? You get a world of what de Larosière calls easy money. Interest rates were super low, cash was cheap, it was everywhere. I mean, for people looking to borrow and people looking to lend, it was an incredibly tempting situation.
But why? Why was there so much easy money floating around? Well, it boils down to two big things. First, the price of everyday stuff, milk, bread, it wasn't really going up. So the central banks kind of lowered their guard and kept interest rates low. They totally missed the giant bubbles inflating in places like the housing market. And second, you had this fire hose of cash coming from global trade. Think about it. Countries like China were selling a ton of stuff to the US, and then they took all those profits and loaned them right back into the system. It just supercharged that flood of money.
And this right here, this is where things get really dangerous. The whole psychology changes. When money is that cheap and easy to get, being cautious starts to feel, well, kind of dumb. That basic sense of risk, the most important tool a banker has, it just vanished. Poof. And that, right there, set the stage for everything that was about to go wrong. Okay, so we've got our motive. A world awash in easy money. Now let's look at the weapon. This is the machine. The financial engine that took all that cash and turned it into a way to spread risk. And, as it turns out, to spread fear all over the planet. To really get this, you have to understand that the whole business of banking had fundamentally changed. The old way was simple, right? A bank lends you money, they keep that loan on their books. If you can't pay it back, that's their problem. But this new model, what they called originate and distribute, flipped everything on its head. Now, banks were more like factories. Their job was just to originate loans, make them, with the plan to immediately distribute them, sell them off to someone else. The assembly line in this loan factory, it had a fancy name, securitization. Now, that sounds complicated, but the idea behind it was pretty simple and really dangerous. You take thousands of loans, mortgages were the big one. You slice them and dice them, bundle all those little pieces back together into a brand new financial product, get one of the big credit rating agencies to slap a nice, safe AAA rating on it, and then you sell that thing to investors anywhere in the world.
And you can see the problem here, can't you? It's a huge temptation. I mean, just think about it. If you're a bank and you know you're not going to hold on to this loan, that you're just going to sell the risk to somebody else almost immediately, are you really going to be all that careful checking if the person borrowing the money can actually pay it back? Well, the answer turned out to be a tragic no.
And de Larosière is just blunt about this. He basically says it's inexplicable how far lending standards fell. You had major financial institutions handing out mortgage loans without even checking if the person had an income. I mean, that would have been absolutely unthinkable in the old system.
This explosion of super risky lending is where we get the infamous subprime mortgage. These were loans given to people with shaky credit, People who were, let's be honest, very likely to default. And these loans became the toxic sludge, the raw material that was fed straight into that global securitization machine. And here's the ultimate terrible irony of it all. This whole securitization machine was pitched as this brilliant new way to make finance safer by spreading the risk around. But when those toxic loans inevitably started to go bad, the system didn't spread safety, it spread fear. And it did it instantly to every corner of the financial world. Okay. So we've got the motive, all that easy money. We've got the weapon, that securitization machine. So what about the getaway car? Well, that was the set of flawed rules and broken regulations that basically let this whole thing speed off a cliff. De Lazier's report really zeroes in on 3 fatal flaws in the system's design. First, you had this huge, unregulated shadow banking system that was making massive bets completely off the books. Second, the so-called referees of the game, the credit rating agencies, were basically giving toxic junk a gold-plated seal of approval. And third, the accounting rules themselves were actually making things worse, acting like an accelerator for the boom and the bust. So your normal, everyday banks had at least some rules to follow. But at the same time, this enormous shadow system, think hedge funds, special investment vehicles, it just ballooned. It was buying up all these securitized products, taking on insane amounts of risk, but without any of the capital buffers or safety nets. It became a critical piece of the puzzle, but it was totally invisible and incredibly fragile.
Okay, stick with me here, because this next part sounds a little technical, but it is absolutely critical to understanding what happened. There was an accounting rule called fair value accounting. All it meant was that banks had to value their assets based on the current market price, not what they originally paid for them. On the surface, that sounds pretty logical, right? But it had a really dangerous side effect.
Here's the vicious cycle it created. Step 1. The boom. As markets went up, the assets on the bank's books were worth more, so they looked richer. That meant they had more capital, so they loaned out even more money, which pushed prices up even more. See the loop? But then, step 2, the bust. When the market finally turned and prices started to fall, the whole thing slammed into reverse. Now banks had to mark their assets down, showing massive losses. This wiped out their capital, which forced them to slam the brakes on lending. And that is the credit crunch that brought the entire economy to a screeching halt.
Okay, so we've looked at all the evidence. We've seen the motive, the weapon, the getaway car. So what's the takeaway? What are the big lessons we can pull from this wreckage to try and build something safer?
So what have we learned? Well, to disarm the weapon, that securitization machine, banks have to keep some skin in the game. They have to be responsible for the risks they take. To get rid of the getaway car, you've got to drag that shadow banking system out into the open, you have to fix the conflicts of interest with the rating agencies, and you absolutely have to change those accounting rules so they act like brakes on the system, not a gas pedal. And the big picture lesson from the motive, all that easy money, it's that these crises are global. They don't respect borders. And that means the solutions have to be global too.
But I want to leave you with this one last thought from De La Rosière because it's so important. He points out that even in the middle of all this madness, some of the big international banks, they got it right. They just stayed away from the crazy stuff. And it's such a powerful reminder that when you strip away all the jargon and the complexity, banking and finance really come down to a very simple, timeless duty: managing risk responsibly. And I guess the real question for us all these years later is, have we actually learned that lesson, or have we forgotten it all over again?